Yeah, well, has anybody never been here before? Okay, we'd like you to give us your name, where you're from, and what you're researching.
Bill. 3 months ago, I'm researching.
Okay. Welcome. Well, I always like to say, they say that West Virginia is almost heaven. I always say North County is almost heaven. Welcome to North County. Okay. I'm going to ask Richard Robinstein to read the minutes from the last meeting.
Jonathan Snare, President County, our meeting, monthly meeting of Southland Pennsylvania Genealogy Society, or at 2:30 p.m. on Sunday, April 12, 2026. 25 members and guests were present, and welcome those attending. 3 first-time attendees were invited to introduce themselves. March 2026. Program meeting minutes were read by myself, by me. Minutes were approved and filed. Treasurer and membership secretary, Margaret Burns, presented the March 2026 Treasurer's report showing the starting balance on March 1st, 2026 of $14,609.75. Receipt for March totaled $250. Personally in March was in the speaker fee, January and February March newsletter, return deposit item, PA sales tax, totaling $340.90. Net cash balance on March 31st, 2026 of $14,518.85. The society currently has 120 members. North County History Center, Director of Library and Archives, had events, provided updates, what was going on in the library during the snow, winter, and snow spring. We've gotten donations, large and small, over the last few weeks, thanks to the effort of Jonathan, Claire, and Tom Horneman of the Library Committee. An intern mentioned last month, next meeting, she is working on a collection of this spreadsheet, which will be placed on the website upon completion. Also, she is both working on a list of collections for the internet. She is also assisting Greg Slayer in processing new donations. A new volunteer begins in 3 weeks to work on our photo processing significance. The McWilliams shoot with the photo that probably hundreds of thousands of images. Talk to me if interested in volunteering in the library. On 27 April 2026, we are doing a library Jeopardy game in this room. For those volunteers who would like to volunteer. Working with Family Life, they should complete card scanning within the next few months. When the cards will be available online, will be determined by Family Search. We continue to wait on Family Search to begin scanning third coins, such as Price Lutheran Sermon Square. Adam provided information about upcoming April events. If you enjoy programs such as South Central, Civil War Roundtable, others, please consider giving. Starting to give local York that begins the evening of the 30th, the lunch evening of May. For more information, please visit York County History, NorthHistory.org. Jonathan Perry, about encouraged to support the during Genealogical work, inspector funds money or other things are based upon the number of people who donate. Only donating $10 to any dinner go online on May 1st, the more likely they will get a different fund. Presenting the balance of potential for the upcoming year. President Richard Cuomo, Vice President Chair, President Lawrence, David Wayne next. The final vote will be at the latest meeting. At the March meeting, the board approved the expenditure of $1,036 for the ladder part for the library and a birthday. The society is going to have a table at the Palestine to America Inspector, June 18th through the 20th. Volunteers don't need to admit to the whole day. If you give us an hour or two, that would be great. I think 2 people at the table allowing others to attend session. We continue to seek ideal for special publications and volunteers to transcribe and abstract records for them. President Jonathan Spear spoke on updating the program in the absence of President Vice President McWilliams. On May 3rd, 2026, Aaron McWilliams graduated a meeting on research regarding Pennsylvania Revolutionary War Regiment. June 14th, 2026, this will be our second, we will be presenting the Henry James Young Award, recipient only about soon. President Johnny Mayor and the state of programs for the next program year coming in April. Brief outreach of those in the coming news. On this meeting will be a tour of the Revolutionary War exhibit with the article of those orders. President Johnny Mayor and Lisa Murray, who will introduce himself. She is on Prospect Hill Cemetery and punishment done on the Revolutionary War. Article will turn.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, the opening on April 1st, 2026, the amount in the bank account was $14,518.85. Receipts for the month of April were membership renewals through PayPal, $58.21, and new members was $95. Publication sales, $51. And research, $40, for a total of $244.21 for receipts. Disbursements, Alicia Forey as a speaker fee, $125. Postal connections for the March and April newsletter, $178.45, total of $303.45, leaving the net cash balance as of April 30th, $14,459.61. Membership total is 140. We have 4 new for this year, and we have so far 5 renewals. The renewal paperwork went out in those latest newsletters, so we have already gotten some renewals on that. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Brenda. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Bentz. I'm the Director of Library and Archives at the History Center. Thank you for coming to today's program, one of many that we'll have this year for this year and many years to come for the 250th celebrations. I mentioned Give Local last time, and it was in the report that Richard
just read to us. So if you're interested, the History Center was very fortunate this year. We earned over $98,000 in Give Local, which I think the seventh highest earner, which we're usually top 10. So thank you for everyone who supported or is thinking about supporting the History Center and what we do in the future. I don't have a whole lot to update as far as the library goes because I talked a long time last month. But it is worth noting that we do have 2 college interns who are starting this month in May. So we're happy to have them. We'll be working on some archival projects. We also have a new couple who's actually sitting at the back. So welcome to the guesses. We've just started as library volunteers, I think on Saturdays, or at least right now. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you. A brief update on the Family Search Project, which we're working with South Central on getting that moving or completed, I should say. The card scanning is in the W's in the vital cards. So for those of you that know what that means, that's a really good sign. If they had more it's a little spotty as far as people coming in to volunteer, but we could probably be done in a month. We have the 2 people working on it every week, but we'll see. They'll be done soon with the cards, which is going to be amazing. And some volunteers have passed on to me, and I verified that they are uploading images, but it just doesn't look terribly organized at this point on Family Search website. So stay tuned, and definitely be letting everybody know once that looks good on the Family Search website. We did have a meeting. Myself and my boss, Nicole, had a meeting with Family Search representatives this past week to discuss the book scanning project, which Richard Conkle is involved. So that's once again just a matter of getting their ducks in a row. We're ready to go. We have the equipment, so we'll let you know about that. Okay, I have about 20 or 30 upcoming events to talk about. So the History Center is filled with programming this year. A new program that Caroline Travers is working on is called Manufacturing New York. This is first Tuesday of the month in the evening from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. So for the next 2 months on Tuesday, May 5th, that's this coming Tuesday, 6:30 to 7:30, there will be a presentation by Stephen Nicholas and Terry Downs on the S. Morgan Smith Company. On Tuesday, June 2nd, same time, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., there will be a presentation by Scott Mingus, who probably many of you know, prolific Civil War historian, but he will be presenting work on the P.H. Gladfelter Company that he worked for many years. So he'll be doing that on Tuesday, June 2nd. On this coming Saturday, May 9th, from 11 to 1 o'clock p.m., we will be presenting our World War II briefing series, of which I'm involved in. And this month, World War II briefings, for those who are not familiar, is something we do twice a year to coincide with the VE Day and VJ Day. And so this May, we're going to be featuring speakers Richard Robinson, Stephen Smith, and Michael Siggins. Each of them will be talking about aspects of the history and development of the Sherman tank, which is something that definitely has a lot of York connections, from production of parts that went into the Sherman to the fact that the man who helped push it through was General Jacob Devers. So please join us. That's this coming Saturday from 11 until 1 o'clock. If you have any questions, please talk to me. I'm happy to talk about it. And we're looking forward to a really great event. The York Civil War Roundtable is meeting on May 20th. That's Wednesday, May 20th, from 7 till 8:30 at night. And the speaker will be Cody Each of the Seminary Ridge Museum in Gettysburg. His topic is "The Nation Shall Live and Slavery Shall Die, the Presidential Election of 1864. So again, that's May 20th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. On June 4th, that's Thursday, June 4th, from 7 to 8:30, our Writers Roundtable will be meeting here. And Pete Neely, formerly of Seminary Ridge, now with Susquehanna National Heritage Area, will be presenting Revolutionaries on the River, the Mifflins, the Wrights, and the Legacy of the American Revolution. So again, that's Writers Roundtable on Thursday, June 4th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Should be a great event as well. And finally, yet another American Revolution event, our second Saturday program in June. That's June 13th from 11 until 12:30 in the afternoon. The presentation of When the Declaration of Independence Was News, presented by Dr. Emily Sneff of the Museum of the American Revolution. Again, that's Saturday, June 13th. So lots of stuff coming up just in the next 2 months. Not to mention, on July 3rd, we'll have a soft opening of our Revolution exhibit, which is behind the closed door over there. And the formal major opening of the exhibit will be on the 4th of July. I'm not sure why, but that's the date that they've decided. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. At this time, I'd like to present the ballot of officers for the upcoming year. That would be President Richard Kunkel, Vice President myself, and Director at Large Dave Wagoneck. Where's Dave? There he is, always sitting in the back. You can see who Dave is. I think we'll just, do we have a motion to accept this ballot?
So move.
Second? Any further discussion, questions? If not, all those members in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, welcome. As you heard in the minutes, we are having a table at the Palatines to America meeting over in Lancaster, June 18 to 20. I'm still looking for volunteers. I'd like to have as many people as possible so that those of us who want to attend sessions can get away from the table for a little bit. So like Richard said in the minutes, you don't have to be there the whole day. If you want to help out with that, just let me know. Adding to all the things that Adam said about the Revolutionary War, as we speak, they are beginning to do another archaeological excavation out of Camp Security. And hopefully, if the schedule works out, Saturday, June 13th and Saturday, June 20th, we will have public days where you can come and be driven to the site. It's not really accessible by regular motor vehicle. We use four-wheel drives. You can be driven to the site and you'll get to see the archaeologists in action. And June Lloyd and I will probably be there with some of our documents to talk a lot about Camp Security. I did bring some brochures along for the Friends of Camp Security if you're interested in supporting that. Is there any other news or business before I turn it over to Richard Kunkel? As I turn this over to Richard Kunkel, some of you walked in late. I had you have a handout. So if you not get a handout, please raise your hand on the screen because while Richard's introducing the speaker. And also our speaker said that the handout will be available electronically. He's going to email it to me. If you'd like to have an electronic form, contact me and I will send that to you once Aaron sends it to me. So Richard, if you would tell us about future programs and introduce the speaker. And anybody who needs a handout, just put your name up or hand up.
So I'll talk first briefly about future programs. Our program for June, which is Sunday, June 14th, the second Sunday, not the first Sunday, is the Henry James Young Award. And the recipients of that award for this presentation are Stephen Smith and Dr. Roger Wilson. We're switching positions, Jonathan and I, and Jonathan's been very efficient and already has a full slate of programs for next year. The August 30th program will be a tour of the Revolutionary War exhibit, which is here. October the 4th, York County Barns by Greg Huber. November the 1st, History, Beliefs, and Practices of the Old Order River Brethren or Yorkers by John Dietz. January the 3rd, 2027, Tasting Food Made from Revolutionary War Recipes by Lydia Stair, who happens to be Jonathan's daughter, and he roped her into this, I understand. February the 7th, 2027, Pennsylvania Mennonites and Revolutionary War. Stephen Knoll, who I believe is at Elizabethtown College, and well-known author about the Amish, among other things. And April the 4th is a show and tell Revolutionary War style. I guess we'll have to wait to hear what that is exactly. And hopefully no violence is involved. And June the 13th is Women and Children at Camp Security by Benjamin Weekly. Our speaker today is Aaron McWilliams, who is the head of public services section at the Pennsylvania State Archives. He is responsible for handling research inquiries at the archives and frequently represents the state archives at genealogical events. His areas of expertise include Pennsylvania state land records, Pennsylvania Revolutionary War, militia, and genealogy. And Aaron wasn't here 2 months ago, but I believe Jonathan said that Jonathan taught Aaron everything that he knew, and now Aaron has far surpassed what Jonathan knew. So it should be very entertaining. Our program today is navigating Pennsylvania's Revolutionary War militia records. And I will let Aaron get right to that. Give a warm introduction.
I do apologize in the beginning. Allergies are working up, so I'm snuffling and I'm kind of congested, so try not to try and speak louder there as I go through. Well, thank you all for coming here. I always love talking about Revolutionary War records. It's something I do on a daily basis, fielding phone calls and emails regularly, especially now, the 250th. You can imagine everything ramped up. A lot of people have now taken interest in DAR, SAR membership, so they've been reaching out to us about their ancestors, Revolutionary War ancestors. And the bulk of those ancestors did their service with the militia. So as many of you, if any of you have done any kind of research, there's a great chance that you're going to be dealing at least with one of your ancestors with the Revolutionary War militia. And as we talk through these records, you'll kind of get a sense of why the majority did their service with the militia. So before you can jump into the records themselves, you really need to know about the militia system. That's where a bulk of the confusion comes about, what kind of service they did, how they served, the different units that they were in and so forth. You really need to get a good knowledge of the system. First off, the Pennsylvania militia was established under a series of laws beginning in March of 1777. Under those laws, they established compulsory military service. One reason why most ancestors did service in the militia. It was compulsory. All able-bodied white males between the ages of 18 and 53. There were exemptions, but very few. Religious belief was not an exemption, although they certainly did work in ways to get around service for those less inclined to do active service. The law set up that it allowed for substitutes. You could substitute an individual in your stead if you were to be called up to do service. Who that person was, it just depended on their ability to serve. If they were judged to be fit and able, then you could substitute them, whether that's a servant, slave, a son. So long as they were able-bodied and the captain was willing to accept them, you could provide a substitute. Or you could simply just pay fines to avoid service. So many individuals, especially with these churches, did pay a lot of fines. Quakers are in these records and they pay a lot of fines to avoid it. Some even avoided paying fines as much as possible, but that was an option under the law. It also called for elections of officers every 3 years. So after the initial publishing of the law in 1777, you had your first election, and then every 3 years after that, you had an election. It's important to note this because after those elections, quite often the unit designations change. One key part of the confusion that comes around. Person in one unit 1 year, and then he's in a different unit the next year. Didn't mean he changed or moved or did anything. It was because they held new elections. It's also important to keep that in mind too, because if you weren't elected a captain again, you become a private. It wasn't like the military now, where you continuously move up the officer scale from lieutenant, captain, major, all the way up to colonel. You could be a colonel, not get elected. The next time they had elections, you could be a private. You could be a private and get up to colonel. So don't be surprised if your person was a captain at one point and suddenly is no longer a captain. That's because you might not have been elected, you might not have been popular with the men. And finally, most importantly, it set up the organization and functioning of the militia. The militia itself is a very confusing organization, or can be confusing, how it's organized and how the men actually were called up to do service. So Under the militia laws, every county had a militia. So you had Berks County Militia, Lancaster County Militia, the city of Philadelphia had its own militia. Within each county, it was divided up into districts, 1 through 8. Lancaster was an exception, they had 1 through 10. But most counties were divided up into 8 districts. Those would be the battalions. And then each district was then subdivided into sub-districts, which were the companies, again, 1 through 8. And then finally, all the men within those companies and sub-districts were classed 1 through 8. So basically, they break up the county into these smaller and smaller units down to the individual. The thing to take away from this is that the militia was based on where you resided. So if you're in the 1st district, the 1st battalion, you're going to be assigned to a company within that 1st battalion, and you're going to be classed. The class did not depend on your ability to serve. That's probably one of the questions that we get most. Oh, he was 8th class, was he not able to, disabled? Did he have any issues? No. Just think of the playground when you were a kid, lining everybody else up and counting off 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very similar in nature. So everybody was assigned a number. And the purpose for that was because the militia was draft. So this unit that we set up, the districts, the sub-districts, and the classing, that was done to set up what was known as your permanent billet. On a lot of the state archives records and some of the card indexes that we have, they say inactive service or inactive or active. I don't like saying inactive. It raises a lot of questions about it. I think the better term is either permanent billet or I like to say a training battalion. These men that were formed up based on where they were located were basically organized into these units for training purposes, for eventual drafting for active duty. So the way it typically worked was a call would come out from the Supreme Executive Council for the 1st class of the Berks County or York County Militia was being called up for service. So basically they would call up all the 1st class men, and then those men would form up into new active duty units. So they would serve in that active duty unit, usually for 2 months or less, and then that active duty would be dissolved, and the men would return back to their permanent billet, where they would continue to train on a regular basis until they are drafted again. So they would be in that unit. You could be drafted multiple times, but it was in order. Start with the 1st class, go to the 8th class. Once you hit the 8th class, you go back to the 1st class. So multiple classes could be called up. But the whole purpose was that is so that a particular area wouldn't be denuded of all the men from that area at one time. So they drafted them in short 2-month intervals, and then they cycled through. With the active duty unit, again, that was only in existence for as long as that service was. And that active service could be from a day, I've seen ones that are only a day, to up to 2 months time. And they typically did that service under different officers. Just adds to more confusion. They're going through the records. But that is the basis of the organization of the militia. So when you look at it, think of it along those lines. Most of the records that you're going to find are going to be related to the inactive or permanent billet unit, because that's where most everything happened. Where they drafted men up, that's where they trained, that's where they find people is in that unit. So most records exist for those particular units. That's not to say that there aren't active duty records. There certainly are, which we'll talk about. So with some of the militia system out of the way, we can start looking at the records. Now, the records that we're going to be talking about are held largely in our record group 4, which is the Office of the Comptroller General. That's where you're going to have our largest group, which is the Revolutionary War accounts and miscellaneous records. That is the one series where you're going to have most of the information. And it should be noted on your handout. We also have a handful of other things, like Philadelphia City has additional records under record group 4. And then the militia loan accounts, the record group 4. Those make up the bulk of the service records for the militia in our collection. We also have record group 27, which is Pennsylvania's Revolutionary Government. Within those records, we have militia returns, which are just elections of officers to list there. We have some appointment files for military officers. And then, of course, we have the government's actions and their minutes and correspondence with them. So these are the records that we're going to be touching on. This is where they're going to be found in our collection. Now, all of these records are available online, so you can look at them yourself from the comfort of your home. All of these records are available through our PA Digital Archives. And we have just go to our website, research online, and then browse, search Pennsylvania Digital Archives. I believe I have more direct links on the handout to the individual records there. So you can go in, you can browse those records and take a look at them. They are also accessible through familysearch.org. Now, you have to go to a family search center or a family search affiliate to access those, but if you have access to those, you're welcome to use those, especially if you're comfortable with family search already, as most of us are in research. You can certainly delve into those. Now, there is an index to the records that we're looking at. That's the Revolutionary War military abstract cards. They are available on Ancestry.com, Ancestry.com PA. Access them on there and take a look. They are our primary index to our Revolutionary War service record, our muster rolls and everything like that. If you might not know what they look kind of like this. Many of us have seen these before. They used to be on Arius on our website, now on Ancestry.com. These cards contain information abstracted from original sources. So if you find a card, we do have that record. It also has the source at the bottom, which will help direct you to the right record in the series to view those records. Now, you can also use the published Pennsylvania Archives, 5th and 6th series, but just keep in mind those records, some of those are not in our collection. So you may find a reference, but it might not be directly to our. All right, now the fun part, the class rolls and the records themselves. Now, with the militia, one of the major records that you're going to come across is the class roll. The class roll is like it sounds. It's basically a roster of men within their trained battalion and their company, grouped by class. As you can see here on there, you have first class, you have fourth class, you have seventh class, and the men listed there within there. These are the rosters. They were done in the spring, they were done in the fall. Because of the volume that were done, they are frequently the records that you find in our collection. They don't provide much beyond the unit that they were a part of, the names of their officers and the other men in their unit, and the class. But class is very important to know for your individual, just because of when they're drafted by class. So it's a roster of men. And they typically look like this, although as you'll find as you go through the Revolutionary War records, it depends on the clerk, depends on the officer who's writing up the paper, exactly how that's going to look. So you have another example here. This one's a list of white male inhabitants between the ages of 18 and 53. But it is a class roll because they have the numbers. These are the classes that those individuals are in. So when drafted, they'd be drafted with their group. Now, on some class rolls, you do get a bit more information that you come across. In this class roll that we have here, they have the notations of M with a check mark on the side. That M stands for muster. That's an indication that they were drafted and they did muster for that service. Now, usually that means, you can assume in most cases, that means that they actually did muster out. I say the more accurate thing is to say they met their legal obligation for mustering. Because you could always pay a fine, you could always pay a substitute, and you technically met your legal requirement for mustering. And you can see here, this gentleman mustered by his son. So he provided his son as a substitute for him, so he didn't have to actually go out. But he met his legal obligation, so they checked him off as having mustered. Another little thing that can make it kind of confusing in trying to determine your person's service. Yes, he mustered, but did he actually muster? Did he provide a substitute? Did he just pay a fine, meet his legal obligation? But you can find that on some of these class rolls. And they're not always an M. Sometimes they say Tor. or duty and a check mark off. Again, every clerk, every officer is a little bit different on the notations. So it might take some finagling to figure out exactly what they mean, but it's always worth to take a look at these and see what notations are on them. Muster rolls. Muster rolls are what most people are most familiar with. If they've ever done any research on Civil War or any other later wars that use some type of muster rolls, and basically it's a list of the company of men doing active duty. And it's the same here with the militia. Unfortunately, there's not tons of these that exist for many of the companies. Fortunately, there's only a few counties where there's a lot of them that survive, so it's very sparse, which again makes determining what kind of service your ancestor did slightly difficult. But they do exist, and we do have a number of them in our collection, and you may come across them. The easiest way to identify them is usually by the date that they put on here. As opposed to a class roll or any other list, it's going to give dates of service, whether that's the number of days that they served or a date range. And this one kind of has both. It has total number of days, but also date ranges in June, then you have the August. Anything recording a date range like that of a list of men is a good indication that you're dealing with the muster roll and not a class roll or say a fine list or anything else along those lines. Another indication too is oftentimes it has a list of substitutes. I like this muster roll because you can see how many names are substitutes. In this case, I think it was over 50% of all of that unit who actually served were substitutes. It wasn't the actual men called up. They just all provided substitutes, were paid a fine. So the majority of the men were not part of the third class. They were another class that just volunteered or were paid to serve in their stead. So a lot of people don't think about that, but a lot of people did serve by substitute, got around service themselves. We call it draft dodging that. But another great source, muster roll is something that will certainly show that they did active service during their time period. So if you find it, it is a good. Fine and attendance lists. This is probably the bulk of most records that you're going to find related to service. They were very intent on collecting their fines, reporting their fines during the time period. As you can imagine, they needed the money, as much money as they could get during the time period. So there is a lot of records related to the collection and payment of fines. And that's probably going to be the number one thing that you're going to come across. Now, the fines for the militia fall into two categories. They fall into non-attendance and non-performance fines. Non-attendance, that was done for not appearing for training. Again, men had to show up for training in the spring and the fall, up to 12 days, usually as much less, that they had to show up. If they did not show up and did not have excuse for it, they would be levied a fine. Usually it's a small fine. It's not going to break the bank. And it's the most common. Pretty much everybody has been fined at some point for missing training. DAR doesn't like to see it, SAR doesn't like to see it, but it's exceptionally common. You're bound to have a miss a day, you might be doing harvest, you might have sick kids or something and try and miss it. So a lot of people were fired. Non-performance, that's for not showing up when drafted and called up for active duty. Those fines are significantly larger because you needed to raise enough money to pay for a substitute. You're not going to show up. We still need the manpower. We need to pay someone to do it. And that costs money to hire someone out for whether it's a day to 2 months. So those fines are much larger. And oftentimes are referred to as a substitute fine. So you're paying this fine to have someone go and pay a substitute for you. Here's an example of a non-attendance fine. It's very easy to kind of distinguish between the two once you see the records themselves. The reason why is oftentimes they'll make a note to exercise, or they'll have muster days, battalion days, or they'll say field days listed on there. And just the sheer number of days will be an indication that we're dealing with a non-attendance. Also, you have small fines. Pound for shilling, oftentimes it's even less than that they're being fined for not appearing. So it's oftentimes very easy to identify it. Now, it might not be easy to know exactly what's being said on it Because again, clerks and officers use different notations. So you can come across one like this. Well, do the zeros mean they showed up 0 times? Is it the 1 that shows up? In this case, the zeros meant they showed up. The ones that they have there, means that they didn't show up for actual service or for their training day. I've seen it reversed on other lists. The best way to tell what is being shown on there as it relates to did they miss a day or did they show up is to look at the officers. Officers were required to show up. Their fines were significantly higher for not showing up, and if they missed so many days, they could be in their position. So most of the times the officers did show up. So I always look to the officers, see what the notation is next to them, and then use that to distinguish whether it showed up or didn't show up. Now this, I know it's kind of small, this is an example of a non-performance. And right away, even though it doesn't say it on there, you don't see non-performance anywhere. One, you're missing exercise. There's nothing saying exercise in the title blocks. You have nothing saying about days, muster days, field days. It's just a year of the fine. That's one indication. There's nothing saying about exercise. But then look at the size of the fines. You have, 51 pounds, 40 pounds, significantly higher fines. Again, they are higher so they can hire a substitute. That is the most obvious way to identify whether it's a non-performance or non-attendance is that high fee. Now it does get a little bit messy because some people can appeal. We'll talk about that next. Some people can appeal it, in which case their fines can be reduced to maybe only 5 pounds. And it's right on that border that you don't know what's going on if you're just looking at a fine list. But most of the time it's fairly easy to tell that, okay, this is dealing with a non-performance fine. Look how big that fine is. And they even went up higher. They actually jacked them up to about 100 pounds at one point. I very much doubt anybody paid that. It was inflation and everything else. I'm sure it was not as much as that sounds. Appeal records. And all the records that you're going to find, these are the most interesting. These are the ones that you're most likely going to get a story. You're most likely going to find maybe personal identifying information, maybe mentioned to family members and so forth. All of the records. These are the ones that you hope to find, and you hope your ancestor got fined so they can put something in there. Unless, again, you're getting in DA or SAR. But under the militia laws, you could appeal if you were fined. You could appeal and give your case. Say, hey, I missed it for this reason. And it was left to the judges to decide whether to fine you or let you go. And it varies from county to county, the way they did it. Lancaster County was pretty rough. Some people had really serious reasons for not showing up. And either they knew the person very well and knew them to exaggerate, or they just didn't care because a lot of the people were getting hot fines. While other ones, again, it could be in regions with large peace church groups, a lot of conscientious objectors, that they're more willing to agree with those kind of excuses that are put forward. But the appeals records can come in many forms. This is a list that summarizes the appeals for this particular county. And as you can see here, you got the name of the person. You're going to have records to class, to the battalion, the company that they're a part of, and then the proceedings, which may say the excuse, and may say what the verdict is. You get, sick and unfit, excused. You have some underage birth certificate. I've seen these list ages of individuals saying I was born on such and such a date. You can find one that says, I'm overage because of a date. You can have parents, mothers and fathers coming in and appealing, saying that, my son is too old, or too young, I should say, to serve or give an excuse. But what you're hoping to find beyond this list is, for some of the counties, we actually have detailed descriptions of their excuses. I've seen it cover all over the place. I've seen ones where people are saying my wife died and getting excused for it. Again, this is where you get parents' names, because it could be the parent that's appealing. Comes in saying, look, my son was born on such and such a date. He should not be part of the militia at all. I have this one up because I like it. There's a lot of interesting. If you ever have time to sit and look through them, the excuses that they give are great. This one I like though for this Richard Nagel. He appeals because he was taken by the British. He was taken by the British and then enlisted with them, did service with them, and then he basically absconded from the British. He deserted, and he thinks that he shouldn't have to do his militia tour now because of all of that. The judges themselves, they acknowledged the fact that he did that. And they decided that we're going to exempt them, not for that reason, but because of the Native American raids that have happened and the fact that he is so poor, we're going to exempt them from the fine as a whole. But I was talking with Jonathan earlier, there is one from Simon Fraser that I'm aware of that his excuse was, I only speak Gaelic. And so, I won't be able to understand any of the English for it. So they're very interesting ones. I've used one of these to confirm a death of a wife before. It's always been rumored that the wife died sometime during the war for a militiaman, and he actually appealed and got exempted. He specifically said that my wife just died and was able to use that to pinpoint when the wife died. So appeals records, very useful, very entertaining. Militia loan certificates. Of all the records, the militia loan certificates are one that can be used to establish active service in most cases. These are certificates that at one time, if you find it in the index, don't provide you much information, but with a lot of digging within the records, you can pull out exactly what the dates of the service were and what the nature of the service is for the individual that got it. Now, the militia loan certificates were issued to soldiers and civilians in compensation for any type of service that they provided during the war. Now, the certificates themselves were all issued after the war, beginning in 1784 and up to 1792, they were being issued. But they were issued for service during the war. So they do apply to go for DR or SAR. The militia loan certificates are part of the militia loan accounts, which are under the Comptroller General, Record Group 4. And the militia loan accounts is a series of records. There's a group of records within there. They're the certificates themselves. You have certificate stubs. You have ledgers, registers. You have vouchers. Taken as a whole, and using each piece of the information in each of those records, you can put together a small story of why that individual got that certificate for doing whatever he did. All of those militia loan account records are on our website. Again, in the PA Digital Archives, so you can find them there and you can explore. And as we go through the images, it's kind of the steps that you go through. But you can find them online. And the primary index are those Revolutionary War abstract records. And to give you a C, this is a Revolutionary War military abstract card. You come across, you'll know you'll get a militia loan certificate because in the lower corner, it'll say militia loan. And then you'll have a certificate number and just the basic amount. Not much information right off the bat, but it's telling you there is a militia loan and I need to dig deeper. So on here, you have the militia loan certificate noted, and then you have a register noted. So if you find this card, the first step you're going to do is you're going to go to the certificate. I usually do, and I get a copy of the certificate. So right up here, this is that George Long. This is his certificate. Again, it doesn't tell you much, but I like to have all the little pieces of information. It's going to tell you what county, it's going to tell you how much, it's going to give some basic information about their interest in and so forth based off of this certificate. I next look at the register. Remember, there was a register noted down here, Register B. So I look at Register B. We have them right here. Now the registers themselves don't really tell you too much. I mean, again, it's a certificate number, name, and how much he was paid. However, if he served with a company, typically the certificates were issued consecutively for the company. So what I always do is I start looking up the line here of the names until I get to an officer. Boom. Captain James Edgar. And I just make a mental note. All right, Captain James Edgar. print that off and keep that for my records. I next go back to the Revolutionary War military abstract cards. Now, these cards aren't on Ancestry. These are a special subset of those Revolutionary War military abstract cards. These are on our website, the PA Digital Archives. So you can access them there. They go under the same name, Revolutionary War military abstract. You go under there, they're broken up into two sections, cards. You have one section that's by county, and then by officer's name. And then the second section of the cards is just by certificate number. So depending on how you want to do it, you can do it either way. You get to the same ending. But what these cards tell us is additional information abstracted from original records. So right here, James Edgar, the certificate number that our John Long got fits right in there. This tells us what the duty is. October 10th, December 10th, 1781 at Camp Security, where his nature of the service is. And then you get another citation. Payroll. So I can now go to the payrolls under the militia loan accounts. Here he is. George Long, there's the captain. Tells you the dates of service right there. And then the list of all the men that were in that unit that were doing that act of service at Camp Security. Now here it doesn't say Camp Security on there, so where do we get that information? Well, if I look at that card again, I have this notation here, distribution vouchers. So what do? Militia loan accounts, I go to distribution vouchers. Now the vouchers themselves are basically just receipts. They're basically acknowledging receipt of whatever the certificate is or the assignment of it. I'm signing this amount over to so-and-so. So these are examples of usually small little pieces of paper. Or for you folks in York County, you're lucky enough that there is a book of the Sub-Lieutenant William Scott that has all this information listed in a bound book form. Makes it very nice. So we go to the page that's noted on the card, and here's George. There it looks like Lang instead of Long. That's his signature. We have the certificate number, and then up at the top, that's where you're going to get that is James, the Edgar's company, and then you're also going to get Camp Security up there when doing duty at Camp Security. So from that card initially, where we only had a certificate number and the amount paid, we were able to determine that he was paid that £5, 5 shillings for service between October and December of 1781 at Camp Security. Again, and on top of that, you can also get his signature. And if there's another George Long or Lang that's living nearby and there's some confusion as to which one did what, if you have a signature of your George Lang, you can compare it. Maybe the other George Lang only signed with an X. Nobody ever signed it. This one clearly signed. A little bit of more information to add some detail to the overall service of the individual. Now, with all those records, there are a lot of holes. There are a lot of holes in the records. There's no detailed, comprehensive history of Pennsylvania militias. There's articles, there's other things floating around, touching on different aspects, different companies, different time periods. But there's nothing there that's really going to provide that operational history that most of us really want. We want to know exactly what our ancestor did during the time of service. So you're going to have to reconstruct it. It's the only way to do it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of holes in the records. So sometimes it's not possible to know directly what your ancestor did, but we may be able to get a sense of what he may have done during his time as a militiaman in the Revolutionary War. The first step is to start with the records that we went over already. You hit the Revolutionary War military abstract cards on Ancestry.com. You find all the cards for your individual that you can. There may be more than one John Smith, so you might have to look at what class and what battalion and use that information to establish which one was from which area of the township. But once you establish your person, you're going to go through all the battalion records and all the company records, and you're just going to copy all of that information down. That is the first major step. You want to get all of that you can to start creating your little timeline of what type of service he did. Next, I suggest going to the Supreme Court, or not Supreme Court, Supreme Executive Council minutes and correspondence. These are published, the minutes are published in the Pennsylvania Archives Colonial Record Series, which is on many sites. HathiTrust.org is free. You can find it on there. If you have Fold3 or Ancestry.com, you can access them on there too. But you have the colonial records, and then you have the first series with some of the correspondence that's in there. And what you're looking for is details about drafts that were being done for the particular county and for the particular class, if noted. So here's an example. This is actually out of the published Pennsylvania Archives. This is out of the first series. And this is basically an order calling up men for a draft. So it's telling us all the counties that are being called up: Philadelphia, Bucks, Cumberland, Berks, Northampton, and they're telling them where to send them. And then you have Chester, Lancaster, York being sent near Chester. Now it tells you the total number. Your county has to raise 500 men, and it says first class. And if that doesn't add up, you need to use the second class to do it. And then we have a date down there of April 25th, 1775. So, okay, there was a draft. If my person was in the first class, I know that there's a draft in April 25th, 1777. Compare that to what records I found for the unit. There may or may not be a reference to it, but at least I know his unit was called up at that particular time. You keep on going through these records, and what you'll find a lot with Revolutionary War is they keep on countermandering things. You know, things on the ground are moving quickly. Communication isn't like it is today, that I can't text you immediately and tell you, no, the British aren't coming this way, they're going that way. So you have a lot of things being countermanded. And you can see here, this is June 14th. So the prior one was April when they're calling up the first class, second class. Now this is June 14th. In this one, they're sending out another circular, this time for the first class militia immediately. So apparently it hadn't gone out first, and then they'll hold the second class in readiness. So again, it's giving you an idea of what is happening real time for these units at the time. My ancestors in the first or second class, we're seeing that, okay, maybe there's a gap in records. By June 14th, it doesn't seem like they all went out by that time, because they're now telling them to come out immediately and to hold the second readiness. So this is all developing, giving you a sense of what is actually happening at the time. And you can pile all those up to get a sense of when your company was being called. Now, I can tell you this, as the war went on, it got sloppy. They didn't follow the law very well. Some of the orders just say, I need 100 men from your county. And that's all there is. And they started taking portions of companies. It got really messy. So it gets harder as you move on. But again, copy those down. Then you have a sense of the movement of the men. You take all that information from the first two, militia records specific to your individual, Supreme Council correspondence and minutes from when they're drafting individuals, calling them up. Then you start looking at some of the militia, the miscellaneous stuff, the accounts, the receipts that were being submitted by captains, the county lieutenants during the war. And all of this here is also with this record, these records here in the Revolutionary War accounts. They just have separate files because they're dealing with the whole company as a whole. But you want to take a look at those records. Why? Because they provide more information. I mean, here you have a list of individuals that actually did 2 months tour in 1777. It lists all the individuals' names. Okay, well, the captain's reporting on these individuals having done that. You know, it might not be in the company records, battalion records that you looked at already, and your ancestor may be there somewhere. You have the one up here. This one says, you know, that this person served 2 months as a substitute for that person. There again, you might not have known that. It's providing more detailed information related to the calling up of individuals. And if you're lucky, your person is there. You have this one down here. This is a list of names of people that didn't muster or march. Again, this is mixed into the accounts. It's not with the companies themselves. It's just in their accounts and their operational histories. And then you have this one. This one is an account from a captain seeking reimbursement for the monies he spent. And it gives kind of a day-by-day list of what he was doing for that given month or during that time period covered by this list. I mean, here, right here, 778, June 17th. spent 2 days giving the men in the second, third, fourth, fifth class notice for to march. So now you know, all right. The Supreme Executive Council minute, you can find the actual order, and then we can compare that date to here. Okay, so he's going around now on July 17th to have people start marching and letting them know that that's supposed to happen. And you have other things down here. So you're calling, reaching out to my company, spend so much money. All these little accounts, while they're not specific to your individual, may shine light on the activities of that county's militia and the men within there indirectly, which you could use to, again, fill in some of the blank spaces left by the records for your ancestor service. So if he was in one of those companies, well, now you have a date when he's being called up. You have the order, you have the date that he's called up. Maybe you also have, a class roll or a appeal record that says that so-and-so served. Now you have all the dates, now you know the nature of the service that the person's being called up. All of this needs to be compiled and put together. So when you contact me and say, hey, can you provide me details about my ancestor service? This is why I say, well, I can't really do that. There's nothing I can point you to directly. You're going to have to really dig and kind of piece it together like a puzzle. And finally, you take all this information and you start using some of the secondary sources. There's a lot, just like the Civil War, there's a lot written about the Revolutionary War and the different activities. Brandywine, Germantown, Paoli. There are tons of books written on there, very detailed, very good books with good source citations that will note militia being there. There's also a number of articles written about events. We have Pennsylvania Militia in 1777 by Anna Roach, which is on FamilySearch.org. You have there's articles written about Crooked Billy, which York County was part of and took place in. You have the massacre, Sugarloaf Massacre. All of these articles and stuff are going to provide more detailed information that you can use to establish the very nature of the individual service or what the militia might have been doing from that county at a particular time. So you have to kind of round it all up. It's a lot of work, but it's fun. I say that. But it is possible to put something together to give a general idea of what your ancestry did based off the records that we just looked at. And then submit it to DAR and SAR, which will say, oh, there's a fine here, tough luck. But it is possible. Any questions? Yes.
Did you ever come up on any Pennsylvania units that were never called up?
I can't say definitively that they were never called up. There were certain units that I know that were which I find more interesting. Certain units that were called up that were countermanded multiple times. There is a Lancaster County militia unit that was called up and sent, and they came without muskets, without blankets or anything. They got there and they just sent them back. So you're useless. We're fighting a war here. You're coming with no muskets, no blankets, no anything. Sent them back. I would say every single class had been called up at some point in time. The nature of their service in it will vary. And I can say probably some of them never fired a musket at all in their entire time. But I think all of them were called up at some point. People could certainly get out of it. There's plenty of people that never saw service. A lot of Quakers, a lot of other youth church that just paid a fine. But pretty much every class was called up multiple times.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I have an ancestor that was, he didn't receive, he didn't apply, as far as I know, for a federal pension, even though he lived plain long enough. He didn't die in 1857, but he did get a state pension. And that indicates that he served with Chancery Township Militia unit that was captained by Captain Thomas McNary. And the only other information I have that was part of the 6th Battalion of the York County Militia. So where do I go from there?
From there, you can take that bit of information. If you know the unit, the date, and the officer's name, you can start building off of there to establish it. Now, if he's getting a pension, it was probably for active service, so that officer might not have been his permanent billet officer.
There also is a reference somewhere with, I think Captain McNary eventually went from York County to Washington County. And I think there's something I saw on Planograve about him that indicated a Colonel Ross involved also?
So what I would do is I would take the name, you have the county, you have the battalion, and if you have the data, I'm sure they gave you the data. On our website, there's a militia organization chart. So if you go into research guides and you go under the county, there's a heading to Revolutionary War, go into the counties. And you have a list there of the different battalions at different time and the captains. The different ones. Now, he would have been, if he said he was part of the 6th Battalion, so I'd assume that captain will appear under there, but you can't assume that he would have been under that company listed there. Because that just shows permanent billet listings. But you can see what captain he is. If he was, let's say, his permanent billet was captain of the 2nd company, then most likely, although it can't be assumed, most likely he would have been sent out with the men of the 2nd class. It can't always be assumed, but that's kind of the assumption based off. But you at least know the battalion, and then from there, I would jump into the records and start going through the battalion records and see if I can find the individual. You could also take a look at the Revolutionary War military abstract cards too to see if he pops up there. But those are the steps I would take, and then you can start building off of that.
Said the structure started in 1777.
Yeah. Before that, what you had was the associators. The associators were volunteer militia. They were formed, their origin goes back to the 1740s, but they began forming in 1774, 1775. These individuals are oftentimes referred to militia, but it wasn't the state sanctioned militia. So these units would form up under Articles of Association. The state would have basically approve or commission their officers. And they existed up until really the winter of 1776, 1777. And then the militia law was passed and they ceased to exist. They were absorbed in there. The officers would then have to go for re-election. But yeah, you do have associators that existed prior that did do service. If you're thinking about the New York campaign and Perth Amboy and up in New York, that's where the associators, many of them were sent up there temporarily until they raised units for the flying camp. But they did exist. Records are few in our collection. We do have some, but records are kind of scarce for a lot of those units. You have some at the National Archives. We have a few in our collection. There's some at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. There's some in the Peter Force collection down Library of Congress. It's very sparse, spread out. There is an article that is for the Pennsylvania History Journal of Mid-Atlantic Studies. That was written about the associators flying camp. That's a good read. But yes, there were associators. Didn't follow the same structures. Yes.
Nick Newman. Group went out west for two different. One was the Whiskey Rebellion, and one was for the Indian Removal. Is there a listing in the archives on who went out for those, or you have to dig in for that?
For the Whiskey Rebellion and some of the Indian uprisings and stuff like that. We do have records. We do have records for the Whiskey Rebellion. It's certainly not that complete, but we do have lists and rosters in that specific collection. That's under Record Group 4.2, under the Comptroller General. You also can come across some of those records in the militia accounts, Revolutionary War records and miscellaneous records under militia. Also, you can find some bits and pieces under the particular company.
The reason why I say that, there was a pension. My fifth generation grandfather petitioned to get his pension, and was served 3 times, 2 times in Camp Security, and 1 time out west.
Okay. Yeah, you can see now that the rosters and stuff get kind of thin after the Revolutionary War as you get further away from it. But there are some. We do have some in there. We also have other units raised specifically for the frontier. So I don't know if he is part of any of those, but it's there. I was hoping you were going to say Whiskey Rebellion because I've only found 2 people. I found people that got pensions for it, but I only found 2 real applications in the state for those.
That's what I'm not sure which one you went out.
Okay.
I'm gonna read one or the other.
Yeah, I've only, the actual physical applications, I've only found 2 so far that specifically, you
Well, I
know.
know you knew that he was wet, and they said he went out wet.
Yeah, but yeah, certainly the records are there. It'll be a lot more digging because there's not really an index, but we do have some, yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to tell which part of the counties the district's covered?
There is. Now, there aren't any good district maps showing them from the time period. But if you look at our organizational chart on our website, the research guide, that will break it down and actually tell you the townships where most of the men, and that's the way you determine where most of the men are from and the captains are from. That'll give you a sense, but we don't have any really hard like lines, okay, on this side and on this side. You have individuals, and I've had individuals that lived kind of right near the border and kept on going back and forth, and they actually appeal saying, well, I'm part of this unit, not this unit, keep on calling me up. So you can use those lists to kind of get a rough estimate of what township, but if you find a tax list saying he's, you know, whatever township, then that's probably where he is. Yes.
Aaron, you did an excellent job. I just want to add a couple things from personal experience. One is when you're dealing with the militia loan records, the name could be spelled differently in each type of those records. So just because the name's spelled one way on the certificate doesn't mean that's exactly the way it's going to be spelled in the voucher or the ledger. And I know that from experience dealing with the camp security stuff. There's differences in spelling. The other thing, a couple of things to keep in mind. One is the militia was not supposed to leave the boundaries of Pennsylvania during service, except under special circumstances. So usually they're not marching to the battles outside of Pennsylvania. In fact, some militia units would not even serve outside of their county. When they were marching prisoners through Pennsylvania, a lot of times each county's militia would meet them at the border and march them to the next county rather than having one group follow them through. And about appeals, you could appeal to be placed in a higher class. So if you're in the first or second class and your name came up, you could appeal to be put in the 7th or 8th class. Then when your name came up again, you could appeal to be put in an earlier class. And I've seen instances where men evaded service by continuing to be appealing to be put in a different class.
Yeah, so you can find a thing, and John's right, yeah, you don't have militia going out of the state, although I have found at least one example when they were marched out of the state, they were marched up the Trenton over there, but it's exceptionally rare, and it had to be done with the approval of the men, if they were willing to go. But yeah, very good points. Yeah, like I said, appeals are always fun. Come across.
Could they exchange their pay vouchers for gold or silver, or was it just paid in continental dollars?
Well, a lot of the folks just sold them off to speculators initially to try and get what they could out of it. Either they could sell for hard currency, or they might exchange. I assume they probably didn't want to get continental currency, but you can get Pennsylvania certificates too. Pennsylvania had their own. I don't know what the majority going through there, how the exchange worked. They're supposed to pay them in specie. Did they actually do that? Most of it, I don't know. I haven't. We have a lot of finance records, financial accounting ledgers and stuff like that. If anybody's interested in going through those, I strongly encourage. There's probably a lot of good information within there that you can start pinpointing for the records, but they're supposed to be paid in specie, but I don't know if there actually were. Yes.
Thank you for a great talk.
No problem.
If someone isn't showing up and then they goes to I'm assuming they had to show up for the appeal.
Well, the thing to encourage them to show up for the appeal is going to be fine. So
Yeah.
if they want to pay that, then they're going to have to.
What was the method that they tracked them down and get them to pay the fine?
Well, you have to keep in mind, you had the officers hold their men. So they had a list of the men they're living in the general area of the men themselves, because they were elected from the men in the area. So the officers would keep track of it. So most of the officers would have those fine lists. And then they would provide that to the county lieutenant and sub-lieutenant, where they would maintain that. So they could just go down the chain, identify the person.
How do they actually get them to?
Well, under the law, they could take their property. They could just do a sheriff's sale of the property if they're not paying. So they can confiscate their land. or have them pay any other way. To do that.
How often does that happen?
I don't think it happened terribly often. In fact, I don't know how well they did collecting the fines. Because Chester County is a good example. There is a fine list from 1783 after the war saying listing men that still owed money on it. So I think they were very reluctant to just start taking land and other confiscating property from the individuals. So they just kept track of it. And I don't know if they harassed them to try and get it, or they, tried to get it out with the taxes. But those were the methods. And then they did note when they paid. Some people were really punctual and paid right away. Others less so. They did try to.
And as I said originally, like, do they have for the appeal?
They didn't. There are examples of individuals that had their own agent that showed up, like a friend that showed up for the appeal, or they might have someone else that shows up to give testimony for them, doctors in some cases, especially.
Because they didn't show up originally, and but if they for the appeal, somebody had to represent them.
Yeah, and you have it like with parents
Because
they're appealing when they're too young.
how they might have to pay.
Yeah. Most of the men appeared because they did fine. I show up too if I got a 40-pound or $100 fine or whatever. I would show up and say, argue a point, especially if you had a legitimate reason. When sometimes they got certificates from their officers, that they would bring with them in the appeal, saying, my officer said that it was okay, I didn't show up.
In another response, Mike, I've seen cases where officers were receiving kind of like nasty grams from the state saying, you haven't collected your militia fines in so long, you better get busy on it. And so I think what Aaron said about the officers knew their men, I think they tend to be more lenient than stringent in going after some of those fines.
Yeah, it's your neighbors.
Yeah.
Later than
But yeah, you get that. Like I said, with other fines and stuff, some areas they're very lenient. It seems like they accepted everything and are more than willing to say, okay.
Rich, they're struggling with regular life here, and that could be due to or the kindness of the neighbors to the officer.
I want to add one more thing about the militia loan vouchers. Those signatures aren't always the signature of the individuals, because sometimes they would send one person to whoever's distributing money to collect the money from various people. And I found this when going through the records for camp security. Sometimes the same person is signing off for multiple people. And so you can't always assume that that's the person's signature unless it's the exact name. It's easier if they were German and the signature's in the original German, but if they're Germanic name and it's signed off in English, it might have been somebody who's collecting on their behalf. And in some cases, the person who's collecting writes his name instead of the name of the person who received the certificate.
Yeah. More often than not, you can have someone show up. Oftentimes they would sign their name and then they would bracket the whole list of the people. Sometimes the captain. Well,
thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned, but the expert is here. So if you need to ask some more questions, Aaron, feel free to talk to him.
All right.